Hi, I am Paweł Niemczyk, and I want to show you some gamlite operation. It's not a solution of anything, but it is a tool, and you could simply use it and separate some logic. It is why you should use. Okay, so you can have business logic in small operation. It is light and simple. You can use it in pure GB and from 1.9. You can have set up a different action on success or failure, and you can set up dependencies on this operation. So that's simply all, but how it works. So you could simply have an operation like a get news, and you could have a rescue from some errors, and in execute you could have a business logic. So when you create the operation, you set up the dependencies. You could set up what happened on success on failure, and simply run this operation, and that's all. It's a different approach when you simply could only want to have a success on failure. Of course, it's a couple different approach, and you could use it with a active record of active model, and it it works pretty well also. And you could build some several operation and run them in different one. And the funnest, you can chain chain these reactions and in recursion, and it's work pretty well. And I show you something like it works. Okay, it's a simple operation, and we only want to have success, and I show you how it works. So on success, we have when anyone likes this game, it's a fail, and when we have some followers, it's true. So it's cool. We have a active model approach where you could have a person and run validation, and how it look like. When we do not provide any params, the validation fail. And now it's okay. And the funnest way, when you have a chain reaction with a recurrency, and it's works like when you have several service to provide the data, and what happens when we want to check the first. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Crystal part 2 of 3.
Okay, so here's the second part of Crystal presentation. Uh, here's a code written actually in pure Ruby, as you can see. So we can execute it with Ruby, but oh my god! But we can run it also with Crystal. Okay, this is about method overloading. So we have the same method that accepts different arguments. So if we call this method with string, with number, or with block, the specific method will be executed. Okay, so here it is. The next is about this attribute that I told you last time, but I didn't finish. It's similar syntax to CoffeeScript, when we can just assign the value to the attribute in the constructor parameter. So we don't have to write something like that, like we do in Ruby. We just have it right like that, and we get it. Now something about nil. So if we do this in Ruby, we get something like runtime exception. So we have undefined method foo for nil class. And if we do this in Crystal, we get actually the same thing, but it's done on the compilation time. To show you that, I will split this process into 2 steps. So I will build it first. And as you remember, building means just to create an executable binary to run the program. And we got this error during compilation times, so not during the runtime. And Crystal can see that there will be a problem, so it tells us during compilation time. Now we can define something like, we can specify the attribute, the type of attribute that some variable like array or hash will store. So on the very top we define array of string, and if we execute it, everything goes fine. But if we try to put number in this array, we got some error that tell us this is an array of string, so we can put number there. The same with hash, like we define that we will have hash that maps strings to bools, and when you run it, everything goes fine. But if we try to map string to string, we got the same error, that this is the hash that maps strings to booleans, and there's an error. Okay, we all know that in Ruby we can do something like that. We can map over the elements, execute some method on this element. We can also use convenient symbol to proc, or yeah, we can execute actually any particular command on this. And if we run it in Ruby, okay, it's something like that. The syntax in Crystal is quite different, because we use dot here instead of symbol syntax. But moreover, we can use something like execute method on the particular element with the same syntax. Like we can do dot modulo dot power, which we can't do here. We should execute it more explicitly. And if I can run it, yeah, everything goes fine. So these methods were executed. This is an example of inheritance. Actually, we can introduce something like abstract inheritance. When we run this code, we got an error that this method is undefined, because we don't know that we have an animal, which is actually an abstract class for both of these classes. But if we use abstract class here, everything is fine. We have something like scoping methods, so we can execute methods inside our class like this buzz, but if we do something like that, we can execute method out of the scope, so defined over here. And if we run it, we got 2 and 6 as we expected. We have something like try. Try is an approach to check
Thank you very much. Ready? 3, 2, go.
Hi, I don't know how about you, but before the conference, I was mostly waiting for Lucas talk about Lotus. So unfortunately, he didn't come, so I will try to, in 5 minutes, replace him. So I've got Lotus on radar since the beginning, so which I mean June 2014, when Luca wrote about this, the first blog post. Currently, it's guys are doing quite good job and moving forward on a high speed. If you want, you can talk about Lotus on quite active Gitter channel or follow the roadmap on Trello. As you can see, it's quite impressive. So actually, what is the Lotus itself? In lighting words, it's a full stack framework which aims to be as modular as possible. So you can easily replace every part or just remove them if you don't want to use it. But talk is cheap. Show me the code. Before I show the code, just another to the application. You can add something, mark as done, or remove. First part, Lotus model. Here you've got just plain old Ruby object for entity. This Lotus entity just gives you these attributes and initializer which populates them, and that's nothing more. Lotus also implements a repository pattern. Here is the mapper. You've got to-dos table in database and maps attributes to the entity. Here's the repository. It gives you some crude basic operations, and you can define your own. Controller. In Lotus, you've got one single action in single controller, so it looks mostly as use cases which may be introduced already to your Rails applications. There is this expose, which means that only these variables will be available under the hood. It's just attribute reader with some exposures list and nothing more. You've got this initializer, so you can define how you would like to inject dependencies or whatever. Routing is mostly the same as in Rails, so nothing interesting here. Lotus also has params whitelisting. Unfortunately, it doesn't support yet nested attributes, but it should be in the next version. You can halt or whatever you need to do in validation for invalid params. You can also coerce the params. Template is not interesting, but more interesting is that Lotus uses these views objects. If you read Joy of Design by Adam Hawkins, you probably know it. So you can hide all logic from the templates into class, which should be there. And actually, that's it. give it a try. Lotus has also a code of conduct, so nothing can stop you from checking it out. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Three, two, one, go.
Hello? Okay, so I wanted to show you and tell you that you are not your exceptions. So basically today we have a statement that you shouldn't use exceptions for flow control because they are slow. Like you can hear that many times. So a few months ago I checked that out. But before you decide whether something is slow or not, you need to have a perspective. So my point of perspective is one SQL query that is just returning one integer. So like the fastest thing I can do in SQL, like count something and there is nothing to count, so it returns 0. So here's the data. So basically, exceptions are a bit slower if they actually happen. They, there is no performance implications if the exception is not thrown. It's a bit slower if there is exception. But it all doesn't matter if your code does at least one SQL query. If you do like 50 SQL queries, which a typical web application actually can do in one request, then why do you even care? Just use exceptions. And that's all, measure everything.
Thank you. Three,
Okay,
two, one.
let's synchronize.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. Testing your stuff the
That
hard
is
way.
not allowed.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah,
I
go
can
on.
shut it down. Okay, testing your stuff the hard way about how easy the life of usual developers is. That I'm talking about people who are writing websites and web services. So the easy way is looking generally like that. You've probably seen this like tens of times. If it's a web service website, it's typically a browser that's talks to web service. There's front and back end. You write some tests, everything is tested, everything is green, red, or whatever. You refactor, and that's the pipeline. So things change a bit if your stuff is run physically. For example, you're a digital science developer, you actually manage your browser instances. They belong to you, they are run on your infrastructure. You care about all the protocols, all the infrastructure. You're a designer, manager, maintainer. It's distributed. Testing gets way more complex. We all want everything to be green. This is what we want. Someone submits a PR request, a pull request on GitHub. There's something in the background. It's sent somewhere. The artifact, the code is sent somewhere. It's built, it's tested, and then a callback returns to GitHub and says, yeah, you can merge it. So the hard way, an example that, for example, I was working on for the last year was, yeah, there's a browser, but actually user is using another browser to control this browser. And there's a common message bus. And there's input that's not coming from the, it's not actually connected to the computer that the browser are running on. And those input devices are sharing the common message bus. The problem is that everything is run on a different machines, and there's a database. There's even two databases. There's a lot of state. It's using ROS, which is like a little bit of an exotic protocol, and there are tens of microservices everywhere, and it's really a kind of big problem. If you want to deploy and run your application, like everything is written as code, you can test it, no problem, but rollback time gets like, you just don't do rollbacks. You just avoid it because it takes like 1 hour, or if it's physical, people are using it, you cannot just, I don't know, do a unicorn fancy thing, I don't know, replace the socket and no one sees anything. There's no way you can roll back because people are using it. So what can break? Automation can break. You run your code on a complex infrastructure that's automated, Dependencies, this is something that typically gets pulled with all your code. You have to care about them. They change because the system is complex. And this is the continuous integration that you have to maintain for somehow. Oh, I won't check that time. So the test scenario from point 1 to point 6 is something that you probably guys typically don't do. You probably never did that. Because the thing that you care about is the 7 point when you just run some Selenium on the top of everything or some unit tests or whatever. So the typical scenario is like user submits a pull request, CI server checks the PR code, CI server runs first unit tests, like it's less than 1 minute. Then we need to spawn the instance, like the whole infrastructure. Like, I don't know, let it be 10, 4, 5, vagrants, dockers, whatever. Then you run lots of tests in the meantime. There's a time that's needed to run those tests. It's not 30 seconds, it's not 10 seconds, 15 seconds, it's like 1 hour or something. So there's no way you can hotfix anything. If you hotfix something, it takes 1 hour to test your single line that you hotfix it. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. 3, 2, 1. No. That's forbidden. You take away all the fun. Go.
Okay, cool. So basically, I wasn't able to buy any slides, so I don't have any. So part of the reason is I don't have like much money on me, basically. And this ties into a story I want to tell. So I would like to do something I don't normally do while talking, so I'll tell you a bit about myself. So I come from like a family that was on the poorer side, basically, not much of money. Because of that, initially I wasn't exposed to computers, basically. So I've kind of heard about computers, like this was the fancy, you know, Amiga versus Commodore versus Atari going on. But I hadn't had any. And finally, when like my mother bought me a computer, I was just like, wow, this is like so amazing. It's like the gray box and does stuff and like displays it and like what's going on. And I was like so amazed. Unfortunately, there wasn't anyone I could talk to about it. So I was just like, whoa, this is so amazing. I have like lots of questions and like, why is it suddenly, you know, blowing up blue smoke and stuff like this, right? Like regular questions. And only later I've discovered like community around computers. So it started with the internet, you know, like internet, like Usenet and stuff. And I suddenly felt that, hey, it's important to talk to people about what you love, basically. So it wasn't the computer that gave me the joy. It was actually sharing my feelings around computing with other people. So I have a question for you. So, like, how many of you basically felt this joy recently, like at work, for example? Like, hey, this is computer, like, whoa, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. So some of you didn't raise their hands, so probably because no joy or too lazy or something like this. Yeah, I know, Haskell. So I know some of us like feel this at work. Some of us need to go home to do this, like do this special hobby, I feel joy stuff. So again, community sharing, sharing feelings about what we do is important, I believe. And I believe we need to be able to feel it at workplace, basically, not at home. So at home as well, but not only at home. Why I'm telling you about all of this? So there's like this notion of joy and community. So I think these things go together very well, actually. So I'm here at Ruby conference. I don't
PHP.
write. Yeah. So sorry, PHP. Just always confuse those two things, like 4 letters, 3 letters. I know. So I'm talking to you about stuff at the Ruby conference that I don't like. You know, I'm not like a Ruby developer, like for life or stuff. So the sheer fact that I'm able to stand here, like, tells me something about this community that is very welcoming. And I think this is like throughout all of the languages and tools we use, I think this is very important. So there are some languages that come from very closed background, so like Java, .NET, one company behind stuff. And I think this influences community very much. So the community also becomes closed, like, hey, this is mine, this is yours, and stuff like this. While Python, Ruby, etc. is more open. So hey, let's work together about this. So what I would like to do is actually ask you, if you choose your language, choose your library, look at the community, look at how it does stuff, how it's welcoming to others, and do good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good catch. Okay, ready?
Ready?
3, 2, 1.
All
Go.
right. So, as I said, future. So, hands up. How many of you don't work on single-page apps nowadays? Okay, maybe not even close to half of the people. So, yeah, we do that a lot, and I do that a lot too. And I'm not sure why we're not talking about it enough here at the conference. So, let's take a look at typical single-page app that we're working on today. So basically, we have 2 separate applications. One is on the backend side, second one is on the front end, and they both have all those layers and complexity, and it's basically a lot. And whenever you want to add a new feature, whatever framework or libraries you're using, the architecture looks essentially the same. And half of that stuff, or even more, is just a boilerplate that's needless, in my opinion. And not only it's needless and it's really boring and tedious task to do that, it's also overly coupled. So let's take a look at example. So let's say we have some component that shows up information about one of the users, and this user likes to write a lot, so he asks us to show a number of his blog posts next to his face. So yeah, it's supposed to look like that. And how do we tackle such problem? So it turns out that we have to touch almost all of the layers in our code, both backend and frontend. Sometimes we don't have to touch some of those, but usually it's a lot. And if we think about it, the only 2 layers that are important here is just maybe modifying some kind of data and model, which is on the bottom, and the view, which shows the data itself. So there is one solution for that, and we've already seen the talk about Vault. There's also Meteor and Elm. But it's not always working, because not all people will want to write backend code in JavaScript or front-end code in Ruby, or use even more obscure languages. And probably more important thing is that it's not always the case that we have just one client. So maybe we have clients on mobile devices, PlayStation or smartwatch, whatever. And so there has to be a better solution. So 2 companies started to think about it, because both Netflix and Facebook realized that they have this problem. They have a lot of client applications on a lot of devices, and it was not working for them. So they tried to make it easier, and they both came to similar conclusions, and they both started projects that try to make it a bit easier. So how does it work? So instead of all the layers we have right now and that we need to touch and modify, we just remove all of them and replace that with this thing. So on the client side, next to the view, we have this Relay or Falcor library. So Relay is from Facebook, from the guys that work on React. Falcor is something from Netflix. And basically what it does, it's abstraction that lets us pretend that we have access to all of our data on the database from the view in the client. So if we have this user model, we can imagine that we have all of the properties already there. We can imagine there's all of these associations like blog posts and whatever. And we have special getter methods that when we use, the library underneath will see if all the data is already fetched from the server or not, if it's stored somewhere locally, and it will just fill out the gaps and fetch the missing parts from the server. And on the other side, on the backend, we have to handle those queries. So Facebook called it GraphQL, and it's query language similar to maybe SQL, but it's in a JSON. And so we don't have to use REST API and add resources and endpoints for every stuff we want to add to our application. We have only one endpoint there, and everything else is handled by the library. So if you want to try it, I have some sad news because it's not 2017 yet, and both those companies said that they will open source that stuff later this year, so just keep looking and watch out. And for now, you can watch videos on YouTube with guys from both companies telling a bit more, or you can ask me later. So thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm ready.
Good for you.
Is the talk okay? So whatever. So I'd like to talk about security CTFs and what are they? They are basically some challenges based on security. You have possibility to legally hack applications that are specifically prepared for these challenges, and basically the task is to find a string called flag, and you can use any way without cheating, like saying that's like asking other people how they solved it. So why would anyone want to do things like that? Well, for me, it's mostly for fun, but if you are into competition, there are rankings, and as you can see, there's a Polish team on number 3. You can also learn a lot. For example, you can learn a lot about file formats. This is a JPEG file, and basically JPEG has a nice property that you can append anything to the end of the file, and zip has this nice property that you can prepend anything in the front of the file, so you can actually extract this JPEG file, and you can see there's some data and there's a secret. But normally, at the first look, it looks like a normal JPEG. Another example is, for example, an audio file, and if you put one channel on the oscilloscope for X and the other for Y, then you can print and draw something like this, and at some point you'll see letters on the screen, and that's the flag. So there are kind of a lot of things you can learn from these challenges. The other things like strange language features, like I'm looking at you PHP. For example, Python, there was a sandbox that prevented running this code because it contained illegal characters like opening strings and etc. And Python has that nice feature like coding, so you can say Unicode escape, and then you just dump something like that, and you can bypass. You could bypass that kind of filter. And for example, you can also learn quite a lot of about cryptography. You can, for example, encrypt and don't authenticate the message. So there was an app where you had to get admin, and if you weren't an admin, then you cannot see the content. And you could generate a token for any user, and basically the token looked like this, and then data looked like this. Then you had a token that was just that data encrypted, but not authenticated. So what you could do is just write a simple loop like this and brute force the whole token. So there's a lot more to learn, and basically I think it's a lot of fun to try these challenges. If you think it's interesting, you can go to these 2 URLs, and these are challenges prepared for different. They are different difficulty levels. There are different topics like web apps or reverse engineering, etc. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. One more to go.
One. Okay. So hello, I'm Adam. I would like to tell you something about Coder Dojo. So let's go. Oops. Okay, what's Coder Dojo? Coder Dojo is a non-profit organization founded at Ireland, I suppose. There is about 500 local Coder Dojos in the world at the moment. Our goal is to teach how to solve problems, mostly IT problems, and developers problems. We work as anarchy group. I mean, that is not some class there. Everyone is following some given topic, but everyone is solving problem that he found interesting at the moment. And participants are mostly children from 6 to, I don't know, 18 years, but there are also adults. So why it matters? Why it matters for community? Knowledge is great power, as we all know, so we share it. So we should share it as often as possible. We should think global, but to achieve our goals, like everyone should be smarter, we should act local. Open source is a great idea. I suppose everyone know that. The most important thing I found recently is our community have many organizations and actions like Rails Girls. Don't get me wrong, I'm one of the co-organizers of Białystok group Rails Girls, but I found many people is trying to convince their friends or family to become developer, even if they are not interested in IT, and it's not the best idea. And Coder Dojo attendees, like children, doesn't care about money. They are going there because they're interested in solving such problems. And yesterday, someone thought we are a good group to act in a non-profit organization. Anyway, why it's awesome for you? I suppose every time I go to the next Coder Dojo, I am really surprised. For example, last time I found 6-year-old kid who was editing a Scratch code of existing game. Scratch is a tool for learning kids develop by using logical blocks. And this 6-year-old kid was editing quite complicated game only to achieve, I don't know, more HP at this moment or something like that. Other kid, when I asked him after he was releasing his own game made in other more complex tool, what was the most complex and complicated thing for him, he didn't mention any technical stuff because he think that was quite obvious there will be a problem, but he found the biggest problem was finding out the most interesting Easter eggs. Also, one 15 years old, I suppose, asked us he want to learn some Arduino. We showed him basics, and after 1 month, he started to learn, teaching us because he get more interested in that. Okay, what else? Kids are really good developers, in my opinion. They aren't afraid to ask. They aren't afraid of failure. Really important is they aren't afraid to admit that other kid can be better at something. So seriously, they are learning so fast. Okay, they report issues as fast as possible. They describe all details of issues. They make pull requests every time, like, Mr. Adam, is it that good? Can I implement that? And stuff like that. They love to help each other without judging, like, you are worst, I want to explain you that. We should also learn that from them. Yeah, if I enjoy this Coder Dojo lessons is 100 joy for me. And last but not least, and I think that is the most important for me, during all these lessons you are improving your teaching and explaining skills, and that is really important for every developer and every person to learn how to express yourself. Yeah, so greetings for our team, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys. One, two, three. Okay. So I have prepared a list of candidates. But no, you can't. But first of all, I want to go through the Ruby source code to check out that we are not cheating in this generating and choosing winners or not. So I am gonna only to show you that it's empty. So we can do choosing the winner. Okay, that's prepared list of candidates. And I want only to say that we are going to run unique on list of candidates. So if someone gave 2 talks, 2 out of 3. Someone can check for typos because I don't see anything. Looks good. Okay. So the first winner is Janu. Woo! Where are you? There you go. Oh, and if someone will get 2 prizes, we will choose another. Sorry. The second winner is Oscar. Maxim. Ivan. And the cliffhanger, the last one. Ciplo. All right. Thanks very much and congratulations.